But yeah, music was my friend always in spaces where I didn't feel like I fit in.
The space doesn't deserve any credit. Yeah.
Absolutely not. Don't get me upset right now. We should be making new genres every day. Wherever you feel like you want to belong, you should do everything you can to make it.
I'm just gonna fucking say it. I don't want the West to be my center anymore. And that's what we're experiencing as a community, as a collective heartbreak almost, right? How lucky is this generation for having so many people to look up to? When I think about when you were first starting your music career, there weren't many references or like people doing things that you might be doing now. Is there anyone in the room who's like under the age of like 25? Hands up. Is there only 2? Oh, okay, cool. All right. 27, hands up. Okay, there we are. There's a few more. Okay, cool. And what I'm starting to realize is that like, I don't know if you guys really know what we mean when we talk about growing up in an environment where like there was no one really, there was no North Star. So when you talk about a wanderer who's trying to find their way, there was really no direction. And now I think people have like an Arooj Aftab to look at and be like, wow, like this is someone who's done so much work which allows us to further kind of evolve the culture of music and music development. It's like my teacher used to say a story about when you're in a desert and you're looking for water, you dig a hole, but if you're looking for water, you don't take 10 steps forward and then dig another hole and take 10 steps forward and dig another hole, but you keep digging the same hole. And here at Arooj Aftab, you've dug a hole over the period of your career, and I really want to get into that. What are the kind of nitty gritties of that experience chronologically? So where does it all start?
So I will say also, I have one about the desert. If you are driving your car in the desert or your ATV and you get stuck in the sand, you know about this, right?
No.
You just pour water over the tires.
Wait, why would I know about that?
I don't know.
Is it because I'm Arab?
Well, because you had the sand reference.
Yeah, but I'm just like, oh, okay. Makes sense.
Well, I was born in Saudi Arabia, so maybe it's more legit that I'm doing.
I think you're more Bedouin than I am, to be honest with you.
So you pour the water on the sand that's around the tires, and then you like accelerate and you get out of this. You stop being stuck.
Yeah.
So there's also that.
Exactly. And I feel like, yeah, it's just wild. I just can't imagine growing up in a creative context in which like you have North Stars. I actually think sometimes it could be an obstacle. Because actually sometimes I think with my own creative process, people used to ask me, oh, what kind of films or like content do you watch or listen to? And I'm like, actually I don't, weirdly.
Yeah.
Like I kind of put out there and then I kind of get out as quick as I can. And then people think that's a bad thing, but I actually think it saves me from influence, right? People, even if it's not deliberately trying to be influential, but we are a product of our kind of environment and we subconsciously like absorb these things and they have an impact on our behavior and of course naturally our arts. So I'm not too sure. I'm still pending on whether it's a good or a bad thing.
I think it's a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty good thing. I feel like when like it's your process, it's my process when I'm writing new music that I stop listening to other music for a while because you want to create something that is in the now and you want to be really innovative and you want it to really come from yourself in a way.
Right.
And that's why you separate yourself from other people's art, I guess, when you're trying to get there.
Is there anything that's truly like from the self?
From where?
Like, is there any art that can be truly like inspired from the self? Like it's uninfluenced by things around it?
You know, it's like difficult to say yes or no to that. I mean, the earth is so old and we've been around it so many times in so many forms. There's so many versions of us in our ancestors and even in like all the multiple timelines that are going on as it is, that it's impossible to say that anything we're creating is purely from the self and new, right? Like there's so much that we subconsciously carry in our heritage and our DNA. And just also how just we are constantly surrounded by different forms of creativity, right? Like you can't actually go anywhere anymore without listening to music. So you are, whether you like it or not. So we are influenced all the time. But I do think that if it's intentional, you're really trying to if you see that there's something that you want to watch, for example, maybe like the way that you create your content, and you don't see examples of it, then there's the desire, you feel the hole, right? and you want to dig, and you want to fill that hole, and then you kind of create a new thing, right? Because I want to hear the thing, right? That's kind of how I started writing in this particular way, where it's like I want to hear this particular type of music and I'm not finding it. I'm finding all these versions that may lead to it, but I don't actually hear that thing. So then we try to make it,
Does an artist like yourself have to be grounded in certain influences to be able to have or to create a new interpretation on your art in the way that you're talking about? Like, what were some of the early influences that you grew up with?
Just all of the things. Like, I guess so. Like my family was really into music and still is, like, super crazy about music, like fanatic music listeners, and love poetry, love discourse. That's how I grew up. Like, music and art and poetry was just part of the woodwork, right? And that was the first influence in how to be, how to be normal with art. And then I listened to pretty much everything I could get my hands on, because you're like, I don't know if you know, but like musicians are almost obsessive, and so you listen to everything. I listened to all the things, like all the classical things, all the jazz things, all the pop.
Okay, so it wasn't like divisive, and it was like global influences growing up.
Not supernatural,
right?
But supernatural inclination. Like, I was like a crazy sponge, and every music was like, wow, like Carnatic music was like, what are they doing?
Right.
And then it's like, what are they doing on violin? That was insane to me. The jazz scatting stuff, like the was first, of course, listening to the vocalists like Billy and Ella, and then starting to listen to the sax players, and just being like, my little mind was continuously being blown, like, throughout my childhood and into my teens. But
were you just naturally more curious than any other member of your family, or like what were the forces that nurtured this curiosity within you musically when you were younger?
I mean, music was my friend, I was kind of like a nerdy kid, and I was different from the others, and we moved a bit. So I was born in Saudi Arabia, and I was there until I was 11, and then I moved to Lahore, and I was there until I was 19. So there's like these 2 10-year things. And when you're 11 and you move to a new place and everybody's telling you that this is where you're from, and you're like,
right,
wow, I don't know about this. And then everybody in school, they know each other from kindergarten. You're having that whole like adjustment problem, and you're just sort of other, and you want to find yourself. And then music was like my homie, and so I would spend a lot of time listening to music. And I think all of us did that too, in a way. Like, many of us in high school and in our teens found a lot of friendship in music. I mean, we are from the sort of Walkman era, not to give away that I am not 27. But like, man, when the batteries die on the Walkman, you are fucked. It's just like, no. But yeah, music was my friend, always, in spaces where I didn't feel like I fit in. It was great.
So when did this friendship with music turn into something, okay, wow, this could be something that I pursue for my livelihood in the future?
I mean, I finished the O-levels, and then I fell in love, and then I was just like...
You fell in love, in love as you fell in love with...
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Just wanted to also in love with music. Anyway,
not with O levels.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's like, that's weird.
not with the GCSEs.
Yeah.
Did not fall in love. And I fell in love, and then I because of that, I was having my teen love heartbreak stuff, and so I just started playing music. I switched from being like the crazy listener to like playing the guitar and like understanding the sonicity of songs. Like, as soon as you start playing an instrument, then the songs themselves break out into stems. Like, then you hear the bass by itself while you're listening to the Spice Girls song, and you're like, whoa. And then you hear the harmonies, and then your mind, it opened a little bit, and I just lost it. And so then I, like, in my A levels, I got 4 Ds in math, economics, accounting, And for some reason, I had further math as well. Like, why? Why were these my subjects? And it's not like I was forced to take them. I legitimately liked them, and I thought that I was good. But I got these 4Ds, and I was like, okay, well, shit, I'm done here. I'm done with this sort of route and understanding of academia. And my next phase of academia will be in music, right? And so then I, started looking up Juilliard, and I started looking up Berkeley, and then I started thinking about, the other route, which is to get an ustad and study for like 10 years, like just go fully in. And I was like, well, I'm not doing that,
Why?
Anushka's in the audience, so I'm not going to say. I'm like, I was like, that sounds crazy. It's like in 10 years, like it's going to take a really long time. And
well, so what do you mean when you say like get an ustad, like traditionally culturally for people who might not be familiar with that musical process? Like, what does that mean?
It means that you become like somebody's student, and you kind of like in one way or the other you live with them, and they teach you everything they know, in whatever form of teaching that they feel is fit. And it's like a really deep and intimate like relationship that is super intense but also very classical. And I wanted to be very like I wanted to try a lot of different things. And so then I just took out a massive student loan and went to Boston to study music that I'm still paying off.
Well, it kind of makes sense to me because you're talking about music production. You got into like engineering, right? Musical engineering, which I'm a layman musically. I mean, do you actually judge people with really bad playlists? And is it like a thing in terms of like your friendships?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier today. I was like, every time I see any piece of content of yours, it's really coupled with a very nice, it goes like the music that you choose is so good.
Hey. All right.
Like, it's so fitting. Like I wanted to ask, like, how do you do that?
Someone else did it.
Really?
I'm joking. Actually, it's probably the longest part of the production process.
Right, to find the right.
Because you're editing it in silence, and then you add like a song. I don't know why I'm telling you, but everyone else in the room, you add music or a backing track.
I really want to know your.
Yeah, when you're
teach
pairing
me
visuals.
How to be an influencer, man.
No.
How do I put it all together?
But then when you imbue visuals with imagery, it has to come together in a really befitting way of what's also being said. And I think there's that harmony it takes a long time to get right. And I was just thinking about this the other day, is that people see content and they see a song and they see whatever piece of output that artists might put out there, but people really don't know how long it takes. The little nitty gritty things that maybe they haven't even like noticed.
So how long does it take you to make?
So I do these 90-second videos where I talk about the origin. Video. So one of the videos I do is I talk about, it's these 90-second reels in which I talk about the genesis story of a particular dish and how it pertains to politics in the world. And it takes a day to film. It takes probably a day to get all the visuals tight. And then
you do the voiceover.
A voiceover. So the scripting takes ages. So writing the script and whatever. And the reresearch and making sure it's ironclad. And because the internet's a brutal place.
Do you do the editing too?
Yeah, for those videos I do, but sometimes brands come involved. And
because they look beautiful.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it.
And the pace is so amazing.
Thank you. But like, what I mean by music? Music changes everything.
And the music choices.
And if you get the music wrong, then it's like it ruins the video which you spent so much time on. So it literally, I would spend 6-7 hours on like music databases trying to find the right music and the right tone and the right cadence. And even when I think about my favorite films, like I watched Dune recently, which the backing track to that is like incredible, and like how different Dune would be if it was just in silence, right?
Right.
No matter how beautiful the visuals are. I don't know how I got there, but musical engineering is fascinating to me because you also alluded to this earlier about it almost being like a codex, right? It's like this Rubik's Cube in which suddenly you learn how to play an instrument and you could literally take elements out of it and start seeing how it pertains to the whole. Could you describe falling in love with the language of music? Is music a language?
Yes, it is. And the engineering part of it it's a big word. That makes a lot of South Asian people happy, as we know. It makes my mom.
The loophole.
My mom is always like, she's an audio engineer. I'm like, please stop this. She's an audio engineer. I'm like, oh my God, it's not a lie, but It's like, that's fine. But it really is something that, like you said, it's kind of like an X-ray of music, you know, and you can see all the parts and you can know all the frequencies. It's kind of like a deep dive into sound and the sonicality of each instrument and how they go together and how they don't go together. And that gives you a lot of insight into it definitely gave me, like, knowing all of that and having already a kind of mind for it, and then studying it has given me a tremendous amount of kind of, I don't know what the word is, but like I have been able to use that to create new music, you know, because I feel like I can hear unusual combinations that would take me so much longer to articulate to someone than I already know how to articulate, that I can hear it in my head and I know how to like map it out to people, or do it myself. And so it's a tremendous skill to have, and it really informs my work a lot, especially this work that we're talking about that kind of filled a space that didn't exist before in the South Asian idiom of music, where, you know, you heard a lot of sort of kind of like Buddha bar stuff, you know, or you heard like tabla and saxophone or whatever, you know what I mean? Like you heard these kind of juxtapositions of South Asian music, but it was never presented in a way that allowed for that music to be part of the like the modern contemporary conversation, right? To talk about that music alongside Kalela or Boy Genius, or in the same breath as Thames, or in the same breath as Mitski and Caroline Polachek. Like, we hadn't been allowed that space, or we hadn't broken through until, I think, it took me almost 15 years to get to an album like Vulture Prince, where finally it was something that was understood and allowed into the scene, you know? And so now we're part of all of those conversations. And they're not saying, oh yeah, you're world music, it's a language I don't understand, it's yoga, meditation, Bollywood adjacent, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, they're no longer talking about it that way. And I think that that happened, if I do say so myself, after Vulture Prince came out.
Yeah, because it broke the ceiling, and of course there was so much success around it. But like, you know, we had a conversation before, and I kind of said, oh, it's amazing that the world is ready for someone like you to receive you in the way that you deserve to be received, which is with public accolades and awards and more in the future. And then you kind of pushed back on me, which was really interesting in the conversation. You said, actually, it's because a lot of hard work was done to arrive at this moment in which we arrived in. So like, that's interesting to me, is that like the space doesn't deserve any credit for arriving to where it's
Absolutely none.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Don't get me upset right now.
Yeah.
Let me not get mad about this.
Exactly. Like it hasn't become more aware, culturally aware. It hasn't become more naturally. It hasn't been able to encompass more cultures and perspectives. It's because of the little nitty gritty work that's been done over a long period of time, and hard work, and grueling hard work by people like yourself, which has allowed the little successes in the awards to happen. But where does that go? Where does that kind of, okay, now you've broken the ceiling in some sense, and where do you hope that goes?
I mean, now I feel like the possibilities are endless, and the possibilities have been showing up, and people know how to talk about it, you know, people know how to listen to it, and they will continue to do that. And I think that there is now a blueprint for this type of music, and this essentially like kind of great new genre, you know. And it's not really something to say like, I made a new genre. We should be making new genres every day, you know what I mean? Right. And people are, you know, wherever there's a gap in the industry that you love, that you care about, wherever you feel like you want to belong and there isn't a space there, you should do everything you can to make it and not settle for anything less than that, you know? Yeah. And that's kind of how I felt, that I wanted my music. I felt like it deserved a space that was, it is the time of now that it deserves to be seen in a way that it isn't being seen. And that means talking to promoters and agents and managers and press and labels and explaining to them how to hear it beyond a world music thing or beyond a meditative thing, you know, really talking to them. And that is really fucking exhausting.
Yeah, that's really, at this point, this is really fascinating. I think I'm going to push on this a bit, because what you're saying to me, what I'm hearing is that you have to teach the industry how to perceive you, how to read you.
Yeah.
And like, so what does that conversation look like?
Well, I had many of them today in my press junket. Right. What does that conversation look like? I don't know. It's just kind of like, it's complicated. I had a thought, it's gone now.
Let me save you whilst you're thinking about that. So I was actually thinking how, you know, me and Arooj were chatting a bit before, and actually throughout this whole series, I've been thinking how to have these conversations that like we don't have normally in the mainstream. But the problem is, even me myself, as much as I am aware of how we are kind of like reduced as people of diverse backgrounds, is that you also absorb the vocabulary of the mainstream, right? It becomes also what you know how to specify as this genre or this people and how to perceive them. So a conversation that kind of wipes the table of that vocabulary and starts with a new one, what is that? And it's actually very hard. And like trying to conduct these conversations without talking about the elephant in the room, which is like prejudice. Because if I name it, now we're all speaking about it and thinking about it. It's like the analogy when people say, when I say elephant, what do you think of? An elephant, right? Hopefully some of you. But how do I talk about addressing issues of like reducing communities that are deeply complex and nuanced without talking about the ways in which they do that, which then further exaggerates or emphasizes the said stereotypes? And I struggle with that as someone who's trying to have that conversation in a way that doesn't kind of kowtow to that. Have you figured out, because you do these press junkets, they're called, right? I imagine these days are just like lots of like repetitive interviews with people who are trying to get sound bites and not really actually really interested in the nitty gritties and the mechanics of who you are. So is it like the situation where you literally have to call people out in the middle of the interview and be like,
no, you have to maintain like a degree of poise and
remain calm and collective in those moments?
I do.
Wow, that's incredible.
I'm very press ready. It's not anybody's fault. It is, like I said, there's like in order to do something that hasn't been done before, like there is that long ramp of like teaching, you know, so you can't just expect people to act right. You know what I mean? And when they say the thing, like you almost expect them to be ignorant in the idiom because they've never had to deal with it before. You know what I mean? And so then you have to tell them certain things or whatever and explain it in a way that makes sense, because they're not going to do the work themselves, right? Because they haven't had to. It's kind of like like 4 years ago, and I think it still happens, where it's like, okay, you know, at this publication the brown writer will cover the brown person's album, you know, and then so all the other writers are not confronted with the challenge to actually connect with the project, because they're just like, I'm not the expert. But then it's like, why don't you do it though? Why don't you check it out? Why don't you start to dig there? But they don't do it, you know what I mean? And so then it's that kind of encouragement, it's that kind of teaching. It's difficult, but it's the end goal is like, it's a net positive, right? If everybody ends up getting it, it's going to be good for all of us. Like, we are trying to build this space that doesn't exist. And yeah, there's so much of the conversation around world music, you know. They love, like, and it's not just by they, I don't mean like just the press, I mean like pretty much everyone who, even musicians who haven't really dug deep in like any music that is like sort of, like I said, modern contemporary music in the South Asian idiom. It's kind of like you know, they really want you to explain it to them. Yeah. And you have to, for now, and maybe for another few years, until it's all chill and they get it. Yeah. Like they get Rosalia, right? Now, right? Yeah. And before they didn't. And they were like, is it dembow? Is it flamenco? Is it reggaeton? You know, like, where is she from? You know, like all this stuff. But then Rosalia and Bad Bunny and Anita, like all these guys kind of came through. And then, I mean, but Daddy Yankee was already there. It's like, it takes a long time for it to just be like, oh yeah, it's just Rosalia and it's just her new album. And she doesn't have to explain the entire lineage of her life, you know, in like Con Altura with J Balvin. You know what I mean? Like, it's like everything's chill now, but they had to do a lot of work to get there, and they had to probably explain a lot of things, and that's where we are right now with the.
So like you were talking about the music before, and you were kind of being quite, how do I describe it? It's almost like you didn't want to put a name on it, of like how to describe your music as something that you've also said kind of transcends traditional genre. What is the danger in calling it something, and why wouldn't you put a name to it? Are you worried that you'd be beholden to that name?
Like
if you were to come up with a name of the specific sound in which you would call the Arooj Aftab sound, is there a danger that you would always be held prisoner to that label, that definition, and it kind of, I guess in essence, goes against everything you're about, which is about there are no boxes, there are no rules. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, it's such a tricky thing because we are so, like, we've been an industry that has cared so much about genre just because it kind of makes statistical sense. Like, that's how we can measure the value and the just like, how do we, it has had to be, it has had to have a name. And but then at the same time, like in the last 5 years, everything has become so fluid, and there's so much more crossover, and everybody's just kind of a little like, what's happening now? You know, like there are albums that are like country and R&B and electronic dance. I think you know who I'm talking about. And people are like losing it on Twitter about it, or X, let's say. You know, there is stuff that, like, all the greatest jazz heroes of our time who are still alive, and all the jazz contemporaries, they no longer really want to say jazz, you know, which is so incredible to me. And I want to like know more about that camp, where like what's happening with them too. And so we're all kind of in this phase where naming the thing is really tricky, because as artists, we want to be allowed to just keep growing and keep manipulating the experience. And we want to be able to our music should be defined by our unique experience, and not somebody saying, you're from Pakistan, you're an Urdu singer, you know, you sing ghazals really well. It's like, just say I'm a good singer, you know, like, and you can call me Pakistani in my bio. Of course, I'm never not going to be. You know, our heritage is undeniable. We inherited it. It's like our treasure. The root is always going to be that. But like when my first album came out in 2014, I don't even know, like I was a baby, right? And they were like, what is this? What is this? Because even that first record was really different. And I said, okay, you know what? There's all this neo soul going on. There's all this, like, all the classical people started making cool new stuff, and they were like, we're going to call it new music. Like how they were just like, new music. Okay. And so that's a genre now, you know? And so people were at that time like neo soul is a new R&B, right? And a new soul. So the new thing. So I was like, okay, fuck it. It's new fucking Sufi, guys. And then
New Sufi.
Neo Sufi.
Yeah.
And I told them, fine, it's Neo Sufi.
Yeah.
And like to this day, people are like, what Sufi order are you from, Arooj? I'm like, they're gonna come get me because I don't know the first thing about Sufism, okay? Like, and so it's dangerous to give it a name. And so I haven't come up with one.
And given what you just said, do you ever feel like tradition is like a burden in terms of the musical process? Like, do you ever feel like you being the first Pakistani to break that ceiling and what it meant to so many Pakistanis, etc., around the world, and people seeing you as someone who's inherently inspired by Pakistani music and singing in Urdu, which is a national language, obviously, do you ever feel like this expectation of people want you to lean into the Pakistaniness as a weight? Weight has a negative connotation to it, but a weight.
I feel very Pakistani, like inherently Pakistani, right? As I am. And I feel like the traditional aspect of it is difficult for me because I didn't study it. I didn't study traditionally Pakistani or classical or South Asian classical in any way or form. So I feel a little like a weird outlier. Is that the right word?
Great word.
I don't think that they want me to be like the queen of like tradition, because there's Nusrat and Abida and Zakir and, you know, Ravi Shankar and like everybody. I don't think they're like, oh yeah, Arooj is like, you know, I am so non-serious in that idiom. Like they're definitely not like holding me up to that. But I think it is a really huge thing to have been the first Pakistani to win a Grammy. I think what that did for all the community and the musician community especially was that I gave them a bigger dream to dream, right? Like we never knew that was possible. We never knew that was possible for us, even as like broke jazz musicians in New York, you know? Like we didn't think it was within our reach at all. And then when this thing happened, like everybody's like, oh yeah, it is. It so is, you know?
Amazing.
If motherfucking stupid Arooj can do it, like, with her weird, like, she left Pakistan when she was 19. She can't even pronounce shit properly sometimes. You know, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like, it kind of upped the goals. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a beautiful thing.
You're on a journey of like creating a genre,
right,
for sure.
Yeah.
But in that process, we had danger also of like undermining tradition and culture and what actually makes it powerful. So that when people see us, they're actually seeing like a reduced version of it as opposed to all of it in its glory.
Well, it's again the thing about how every artist should be able to have their experience and their experience accepted, right? And as somebody, it's like no ruler, no rules, right? So if I didn't have somebody, if I wasn't held accountable to the authenticest, most purest, most classical form of the traditions that we talk about, right? Then what I'm creating is inherently like taking from the treasures that I've inherited from my heritage and building something that I wouldn't at all ever call mainstream, you know? It's insane that people ended up liking my really neurotic, very layered, very minimal, very slow-paced, super intricately placed music. It's like the opposite of mainstream, right? And in a way, it respects tradition so much, you know? It approaches some of the greatest poems of our time with so much respect and elegance and style.
Love.
You know, that if I'm ever confronted with the idea that I'm bastardizing tradition for the sake of mainstreamism, I feel like that's just nuts, you know? Like, that's just absolutely crazy. And there's so many examples of people actually doing that are like awful and just like plastic disco nutsland. And
but
like,
I also think
you know what I mean?
wouldn't-
I'm just like, how could you be saying that to me? You know? I take so long to write one song because I'm really writing it from the ground up, from like where it was written in the 18th century or whatever, and how it connects to me in 2024 and what it does to my personal experience as a human being, and what is my personal relationship with all the musicians that I work with and all the places and cultures that I've interacted with. And I piece those things together really slowly, and I really, really meditate on it being respectful.
Yeah, I think people feel it.
Yeah.
I think like whenever things are done with like intentionality, without the intentionality at its core, you can definitely feel the difference. I think like what I've loved the most about your journey or your musical journey is just how it's done with like traditional genre and breaks out of people's perceptions of what music should and needs to be. And I think there's a lot of people who are in the room who are not musicians per se, but the way we can find relatability to that journey is that no matter what you do, but a lot of us here from diverse backgrounds are always constantly having boxes placed upon us, right? But here we're having a very real case study of how that is transferred in a musical environment, right? So it's not only our identity and our behaviors, but it's also our art, which is exposed to the same scrutiny and reducing. And I'm always wondering, because you are creating this new genre, the analogy for us as people trying to figure out our identity is like, what does a post-race, post-ethnicity, post-ideology community look like? if we're using Arooj as an analogy for what music can be, which is done away with traditional genre, and we use ourselves and put ourselves in the place of music, what does that look like? And I haven't really heard it ever really articulated or kind of like given a kind of a definition or adjectives or described. But look at this room right now. There are people from all different races, ethnicities, backgrounds, who are all coming from very different walks of life. But there is a shared lived experience in this room, which could be something, right? Like it's a lived experience which we do organically. But you know, if Arooj's music was a room, like you would imagine the analogy to continue is a room of people like this. And that's what I see, which is so useful in your music, is that I see it. I see that. It's like we've been done with the labels and we're creating something that is entirely new and refreshing. Is that a scary process? Because I know for myself and like who I am,
right,
it is a scary journey trying to find a space for me and create something new that doesn't exist traditionally.
Right.
Is that scary in the music world as well?
Well, I'll say, since you're talking about the room, and I was thinking about this, I was thinking a lot about diaspora. You know, last year I did this record with two musicians who are older than me, and they're both like, one of them is, I guess, his origin, or he's originally from, and we fumble over this all the time, and he's Pakistani. He was born in the US, and he's in his like late 50s, Shahzad Ismaili, and then there's Vijay Iyer, who was also born just like in New York and is from India, whatever, you know. But those guys, and so what we were confronted with, or what I learned from being with them, is that they are diaspora, South Asians, and that depending on where you're from and what went down, like in the US, you know, a lot of the immigrant kids growing up probably felt very, very unsafe, you know, in being in kind of carrying or I guess inheriting any of their brownness, you know, in the very like raggy, disgusting kind of like American high school system, like, you know what I mean? And so they suppressed it a lot. And so there's that like, and then as adults in their lives, like Vijay is a jazz pianist and Shahzad is basically like a rock musician, you know? Crazy. And so we were confronted with the idea, and then I'm not like born out over, it's weird, like, because Saudi Arabia is just like, okay, whatever, we don't even, you know, like, born in Saudi Arabia, but am I diaspora? No, I really did go then and live in Pakistan, so I feel different from them. And then our combination is so strange because the diaspora kids have this sort of void in their storyline, and then as they're kind of getting older, they think about it and they wonder how to connect. And then it's music like the three of us made together that really resonates with diaspora because it reminds them, it connects them to tradition, but also keeps them in the present, you know. And that's what the room is, and that's when you hear this new music in this idiom, in the South Asian tradition, but is keeping you extremely current. You see the music is your mirror, and that's amazing. Exactly. Instead of going around being like, I don't know, going to like Jackson Heights and buying a tacky outfit, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get it.
It's so weird how much the diasporic struggle is and how little there is to kind of like help that, you know?
But that dilemma for me, I find very fascinating because it's like, it takes a lot of courage to imagine a different world, right?
Right.
And like a lot of us are rooted in cultures of which we love, but there are things also which we probably love less. And it takes a lot of culture to decide these are the things I'm willing to leave and for what I want to build in the future. Yeah. And again, musically, the analogy works perfectly, right?
Right.
And like, I feel like I struggle with that because I'm also, these cultures and the traditions that I love are also associated with people I love. Ancestors, grandparents, parents. Yeah. And if I'm going to be brave enough to build a new world, it also means you're leaving things behind on which I've nostalgically have a attachment to.
Yeah. And I mean, we will always have nostalgia, because the way that we left things 10 years ago, like that same street is different even now, even in London, for people who were born and raised here. You know what I mean? Like the world keeps changing, and the places that you were grounded in are no longer the same. So the nostalgia for what you experienced before is going to just keep regenerating itself and manifesting itself in your life, right? In one way or the other. But I think I understand what you're saying, where you think that you're leaving the folks behind.
Yeah, I think like I imagine a world.
Dangerous.
I guess I'm also mixed, so it kind of happened in my house actually naturally. But like when I imagine like a broader community, I imagine like a world in which like perceived differences between people in this room don't exist anymore, but there is a shared experience in which we come together. What does that look like? And I it's tough because when I think about the world and its issues politically, everything that's going on in the world, there's so much division, and that division is also built on very arbitrary lines.
Yeah.
Right. And like I'm mixed. Like for me, like what's Asian and what's Arab and what's African for me has always been very ephemeral. It's like it's ridiculous because I actually see the commonality between them all.
Right.
But then the divisions of a line and these two people, the differences or perceived differences of what we have in one another is the root of all tension.
Yeah.
And even musically, again, the analogy works because it's like these perceived tensions between genres are actually non-existent. So you can create something new which brings together jazz, soul, Sufism, etc., and create something beautiful as a result of it.
Yeah.
So like that's where I see the kind of tandem experience of me just trying to figure out for my kids in the future, are they going to be living in a world that's like two joined experience and ethic and morals and values that we all share in this room, or are they going to hold on to the tribalistic, purest way in which we hold on to tradition?
I mean, we have to do all that work, right? Because you're essentially talking about erasure, and that is the most frightening thing for any society. Like whatever even is happening right now in Palestine, like we all have to do so much work to make sure that like an entire culture and people and their ways don't get erased, and that requires like keeping the traditions going, and so much does get erased. You know, like entire animals get extinct. Sorry, I'm just going on a tangent, but the point is that like there has to be, and so much of Hindustani classical music is also completely being erased. Like there's not any more veena players, and you know there's so many great, incredible instruments that are no longer being taught or passed down. Like the erasure is happening, and the sort of it's going into the dust because of time, and also because of the intentional intent of people. And so it is important to.
You're good.
It is super important to not completely let go of that, but it is also really important to create new work. That keeps it in context. The unity of certain communities is really important, right? And like we live in a patriarchy and a white supremacy and a capitalism, right? And so those three things kind of break us apart at all times. And we've been taught so much hate that we have to unlearn. And we, like, when I say that that's like those three things kind of run the world, how are we going to be sort of caring about all our collective cultures if we're kind of pitted against each other all the time, you know? And it's like the only one brown person gets the slot, and then there isn't enough space for the others. And then we are just kind of, it's not cool, you know, and we're not there yet. I think there's so much more work that we do have to do as different communities that overlap a lot to kind of bring, like you're the one guy doing the, like talking about Indonesian food and history and digging deep into Yemeni stuff and just highlighting like the Uzbeki amazing food that was just laid out by this beautiful family. Like, you know, you're doing all this work, but you probably feel a little bit alone, right?
Yeah, well, in some sense, I guess. But there's amazing work being done across the board, I guess, in the way that I do it, maybe.
Yeah. But
like it's being done through other mediums and other like ways. But you're right, it will take a collective effort to get there. But like, I just kind of feel like what I'm really concerned about is, especially everything that's happened over the last 6-7 months, I kind of feel like I don't want like the West to be my center anymore. And I think that's what I'm trying to say in really like long-winded ways without actually saying it, but I'm just going to fucking say it. Is that like, because the tension can be is that we were born here also and we love it. This is the love story, right?
Yeah.
We actually love being here. I love that I'm like a London boy. I love the influences and the kind of creative like input it gave me, and I wouldn't change it for the world. But the heartbreak is feeling like that this country has like let you down, right? And that's what we're experiencing as a community, as a collective heartbreak almost, right?
Right.
And where do we sit in that situation as people of artists, of people of output? That heartbreak is going to be like reflected in our work. And like I'm just trying to figure out like, okay, like fuck the West and everything that I thought was like the right thing to do and the cool videos to make and the cool films, Godfather, all this bullshit that was made here. Like, let me go back into the cultures that didn't have their light of day and make them the center of my output.
Yeah.
Right. And whatever new world we build, it will be created from one playing field. Absolutely. And not some like magnetic hegemonic power that's forcing the cultural conversation that it wants to have, not the ones that we need. Right. And that's the kind of tension that I'm trying to figure out for myself. And I don't have the answer and or the golden bullet, but like as a reflection for creators in the room is being like, what does that conversation, whether we create new centers and what does that future look like? But this is why your work is so important, because your work has kind of, again, if all the ingredients on this table, or you just came and just kicked it and was like, fuck this, like I'm going to build something that's like me, authentically me, right? Which takes the jazz and the soul and in the ways that you loved it to you, but also the tradition and the culture in a way that isn't duplicitous. And what I love about you also, you're one of the realest people. A lot of people, I think, like, I especially thought like there's a seriousness about you, especially in music, because it makes you feel emotively, like so many like deep things, etc. But then you're actually ratchet as well. You're like so like, really good fun. So it's like this kind of paradoxical dissonance, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
But you're actually like unapologetically authentic. It's like you're not trying to play to tradition.
Yeah.
And like fetishize it almost, which we can do as people of cultures, also fetishize our own culture. Like, oh, like this is what makes me stand out. Let me be that kind of like cultured kind of brown girl doing neo koali, etc., all that kind of stuff. Because it's not real to who you are. It would be fake for you to do that. Yeah. Right? And like you actually owning that actually there are influences like jazz, etc., that I love, and leaning into that unapologetically just goes to show the character of you being unapologetically yourself, despite what other expectations what people might have of you. So I thank you for that. I don't want to take time away from the Q&As.
Let's do it. Let's hit it.
But just to warm you guys up and to get those juices flowing, help me with a round of applause for Arooj Aftab, everybody.